Well, an aggressive move from Iran today. Their military is conducting new tests on its missile and radar systems. This is in direct defiance of new U.S. sanctions. The United States imposes sanctions after Iran launched a ballistic missile test that was last weekend. So for more, we turn now to James Carafano. He's the Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Okay, James, I want to ask you, what's the message you think that Iran is trying to send to the United States? They're essentially ignoring the sanctions. How far do you think this could escalate with the U.S.?
Well, that's, of course, the question that a lot of people are asking. When you have a new president come in, anytime there's something provocative in the world, people think there's always, well, they're testing the new administration. And they may be. Most of the people that I talk to from the Middle East and from Europe, they see this as an Iranian provocation. And that's why I think they were looking from the U.S. for a strong response to that. I mean, I don't think this is going anywhere. I mean, I don't think this is escalating anything major. But I do think it does appear that both the Iranian and the American regimes are kind of feeling each other out.
Do you think that the military exercises like the one they put on today will put the Iran nuclear deal in jeopardy?
I think the only country that can scrap the Iran nuclear deal at this point is Iran. I think it's very clear, talking to the Europeans, that they never thought that this was a good deal. They largely went along with it because the President of the United States wanted to, but they remain committed to it. I think this administration has already sent signals that they think it's a crummy deal, but the United States signed the deal and they're committed to it. So I don't think either the U.S. or its European allies are looking for a way to walk away from the deal. But I think they've all sent the message that the deal is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, and that everybody expects Iran to scrupulously abide by its agreements under the deal, and that all the other side things are that's open for business. So if Iran violates UN sanctions, which it did with the missile launch, or conducts other provocative acts, that they should expect everybody else to push back. And the problem for Iran is that could put them right back where they started. I mean, mostly what they were interested in was a pretty hefty cash flow, but if businesses get more risk averse because they think other countries are cracking down, the money dries up, then the benefits of the Iran deal for the Iranians look pretty skimpy.
I want to ask you, President Trump tweeted out that Iran is, quote, playing with fire. How should the U.S. respond if there are new tests?
Well, I think it's a mistake to think that the response necessarily needs to be symmetrical. In other words, they do something and we do something in kind. There's many, many levers, diplomatic, economic, political, military, that the U.S. can demonstrate to both its allies in the region and in Europe and to the Iranians that playtime is over. And I think you want to consider those. What is important is, I mean, the United States has essentially put down a red line. I mean, when General Flynn stood up, or Mr. Flynn now stood up and said, we're not going to go for this, the United States clearly has to respond if Iran continues these provocations. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to shoot down missiles or drop bombs or something. And I think, quite honestly, that's unlikely because the U.S. actually does have a lot of levers that they can use to pressure the Iranians.
When President Trump announced this immigration ban, James, Iran was one of the first countries to come out and say that there will be retaliation for this, that they are going to respond. Do you think that this whole entire missile testing is linked in any way to this immigration ban?
I think that's unlikely. There's already a lot of prohibitions and limitations on travel from Iran. Iran's on the list almost uniquely because it is a state sponsor of terrorism. It's widely recognized as that. That's why it's on the list. Actually, you hear people lump all these countries and bigger things when they complain about this, but if you ever get back to granularity, find me a U.S. official or intelligence person or any responsible person that says, are you concerned about visa restrictions from people coming from Iran? And they would look at you and say, well, no.
I want to ask you, James, before I let you go, we've seen sort of some pushback. We've heard reports with General Kelly at DHS and Mattis as well. How do you think, and possibly Tillerson, who's now Secretary of State, we're not sure exactly what the relationship is inside the White House, but can you tell us, just based on what you know of these three men, do you think that somehow they're going to counter the voices in the White House when it comes to foreign policy and defense? And do you think the president will listen?
Yeah. I think that's exactly the wrong lead of how this team's going to work. And I worked on the presidential transition team because it's a nonpartisan, nonprofit activity. It's not a political activity, and for 4 months. And and worked on the confirmation of several of those folks and talked to several of those folks. I think this is a leadership team. I think they share trust and confidence. I think they work well together. Obviously, they have very different personnel styles, but people that portray this as kind of an us against them, that it's the cabinet against the White House, I just think those are kind of ignorant comments of people talking in their head and not talking to people who are actually running the government.
But there has been some concern that will the president listen to General Mattis, a man who has spent a great deal, has a reputation for studying military history. What do you do if you're General Mattis and you can't get through to the president of the United States?
I don't think that's a problem. The president of the United States trusts no one in the federal government more than General Mattis. He hired General Mattis, and he hired him because he respected his opinion. For Donald Trump to ignore his cabinet would go against everything we know about him as a leader forever. His whole leadership style is, I hire really smart people and I listen to the really smart people I hire, and then I make sound decisions, not based on what I personally believe or rumor, but on what really, really makes sense. And I have every anticipation that that's exactly how national security decision making will work in this White House. I have to be honest with you, 99.9% of the analysis I've seen based on how decision making is working is based on people who have zero knowledge of how it actually works, or actually, even if you didn't know anything, if you just know General Mattis, he would not work for somebody he did not believe in and did not trust, period.
James Carafano from the Heritage Foundation, thank you for joining us this weekend, James.
Hey, thanks for having me.